The New Babylon, Chapter 12. Kevin packed his 3-day assault pack with just the essentials he would need. The trek out to Liberty Island shouldn't take more than 4 days round trip if all went well. But then again, how often did all go well these days? He turned to walk out the front door, and there was Sarah, his wife, standing at the bottom of the stairs. She had on her medic BDU pants, her Merrell Gore-Tex hiking boots, and a hoodie with a gray Carhartt vest over it. She was wearing her assault pack too, and she had her sunglasses positioned on her coyote tan cap and a look of steely determination in her eyes. Kevin stopped when he saw her. He couldn't help thinking that after all this time together, after all these years of marriage that they shared, that she still looked as good as the day he met her. Better, in fact. Every time he told her that, she would just smile and say, "I don't think so, Kev. You've just learned to love me more." He always smiled and replied, "Yeah, that's probably it." Then she would playfully smack him in the arm or on the back of the head, whichever she could manage before he stepped away. Today, as he looked at her, all he could manage to say was, "No way, Sarah. You are not coming with me." She was already prepared with her argument, and she wasn't taking no for an answer. "I am coming, Kevin, and every minute we spend arguing about it is darkness wasted. It will be light in 4 hours, and you know as well as I do that if we aren't out past Brooklyn by sunrise, we could be in trouble." Kevin looked at her. "Honey, you're needed here. You are the best med person we have. And besides, what about Grace? She needs you here." Sarah was ready for any argument he could make, and quickly retorted, "Honey, Grace is a capable medic, and she's a big girl and capable of taking care of herself for a few days." Kevin knew this, but he was thinking about the possibility of it taking more than a few days, the chance that they might not make it back at all. He started to say it. "Sarah, what if—" She interrupted him right away. "Kevin, stop right there. During all your military deployments, all the time you were gone from us, I was back here by myself. The last few times with a new baby. I never even knew where you were or if you were alive or dead. I desperately waited for some word, some form of contact, at the same time dreading it. Dreading seeing the car pull up in front of the house. We lived on base housing the first few deployments. I saw the car pull onto our street. I prayed it wouldn't stop at our house. And then, when it didn't, I felt guilty for praying it because it just meant it was going to stop at someone else's house. Do you know that once it pulled right up, slowing down in front? I watched and closed my eyes as it crept up. When I opened my eyes, I saw it had stopped next door, at my best friend Kim Wilson's house. You remember Kim and Jack." Kevin just nodded and lowered his head. "After they left their house, I ran over there. I stayed up all night with her crying. I didn't leave her side for 5 days, until after the funeral. I had to help her make the arrangements." Sarah paused and hung her head. She started to cry softly. "Kevin, you know as hard as that was, as hard as watching Kim stand at Jack's grave as they fired the salute. She reflexed every time the rifles fired. She broke down and fell to her knees on the last shot. I had to help her up, help her to regain her composure. And through it all, I couldn't help, on some level, feeling relieved that it wasn't me there on my knees, retching hysterically." Sarah paused again, and Kevin put his arms around her. "Honey," was all he could say. He had no arguments, no magic words to form a defense to convince her to stay behind. He just knew with every fiber of his being that he did not want her out there in the city, out in harm's way. He wanted her here, Safe. Well, as safe as anyone could be in this crazy city right now. She lifted her head and pushed herself off of Kevin's chest, out of his arms. But you know what the worst part of it was, Kevin? The hardest part? After the funeral, Kim left to go home with her parents. She didn't even pack her stuff. She had the military ship it to her. And that night, as I sat alone in our dark living room, staring out the window, I couldn't help think to myself that Kim was somehow, in some small way, better off than I was. She knew where her husband was. She had a terrible time of grief ahead of her, but at least she knew. I had nothing but silence, nothing but the unknown. I still didn't know where you were, or if you were dead or alive. I was just stuck, sitting there, waiting for that car. She started to cry. Kevin drew her back into his arms. Honey, it's different now. I'm only going to be gone a few days. Sarah hugged him tightly. Only now, Kevin, if you don't come back... She could barely form the words. If you don't come back, there won't be any car. There won't be anybody to let me know. You'll just be gone. And I'll spend every day for the rest of my life looking out that window, waiting and not knowing. Kevin squeezed a little tighter, holding his wife. She looked up at him and hugged him tighter as well. Kevin, I can't do that again. I can't go through that again. She broke away from him. She took the Bible from her inside pocket of her vest. She opened it up to the page where the bookmark was positioned. She handed it to Kevin and told him to read it. She had a few verses highlighted with now faded yellow marker. Kevin glanced down at the page, and when he looked up at his wife, he too had a tear in his eye. He read the highlighted verses from the book of Ruth. And Ruth said, Entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. Where thou diest, will I die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if aught but death part thee and me. Kevin closed the Bible, handed it back to Sarah. Sarah smiled slightly, put the palm of her hand against his chest. Honey, I read you that verse when we got married. On that day, we ceased being two people and became one. In the years that followed, you taught me to love the Lord, and through his holy word, he taught me to love and to trust him. And he taught me to love and to trust you. And baby, I do love and trust you. When I read you those verses on our wedding day, I meant it. I meant it in a spiritual way, in a practical and principled way. But after you came home the last time, after the chopper crash that almost killed you and the guys, the crash that did kill 6 of your team members, we renewed our vows. And when we did, I read that exact same scripture from the exact same Bible. And I did mean it both times. But the second time, after all we had been through when you were gone, I meant it literally, as well as spiritually and practically. Those words have literal significance for us now, honey. I don't want to ever leave you again. Not for one night. I will literally go where you go and lodge where you lodge. And if it comes down to it, honey, I will die where you die. Kevin looked into his wife's eyes. And Kevin, if that happens, I'm okay with that. And I need you to be okay with that too. I want to know that we will always be together, that whatever time the both of us have left this side of glory will be spent together. That's all that matters to me, baby. Kevin just nodded and pulled his wife in close. I love you, Sarah. We will always be together, honey. I promise you that. She smiled at him. Thank you, baby. Thank you. Then she said, and you don't need to worry about Grace. She has Winston to look after her. Kevin stepped back and gave her that concerned father look. Winston? He asked. I don't want that thug anywhere near my daughter. Do you see the way he looks at her? Makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Sarah just smiled. Yes, Kevin. I've seen the way he looks at her. And more importantly than that, I've seen the way that she looks at him, too. No way, Kevin said. There is no possible way that's happening. That street thug with those dreadlocks down to his rear end and shoes with no laces? He doesn't even know how to pull his darn pants up, for goodness sake. What's up with that? That boy's a menace. He's a hoodlum. And there's no way that is going to happen. I will kill him first. So help me. Sarah stepped toward her husband. Kev, relax. She's an adult, capable of making her own choices. And just for the record, it is already happening. What? Kevin asked. What do you mean it's happening already? I mean, they're already together. My goodness, don't you see what's right in front of you? You're probably the most observant person I've ever known. The most situationally aware man on earth. And yet, when it comes to Grace, you don't have a clue. You're looking at a 5-year-old girl still, and she's not. She's grown up. Winston has been working with us for a while now at the infirmary. I watched them getting closer. I believe that your daughter's falling in love with that young man, Kevin. And your opinions, your values, are the single most important thing in that girl's life. So when you confront her, like I know you're going to do, you'd better choose your words and actions wisely. She looks up to you, Kev. What you think means everything to her. And Winston, he's scared out of his wits of you and how you will react to all this. And Winston is a good man. He loves the Lord, and I believe he loves our daughter. I know he makes her happy. And that's all I want for her. Kevin just stared into his eyes. She stepped toward him again and placed the palm of her hand on his chest and patted it. Baby, trust me on this one. Please. I've spent a great deal of time with the two of them. I watched them. It's all good, honey. It's gonna be all right. Please, please trust me on this, sweetheart. Kevin paused and shook his head. And that blasted Jamaican music, Bob Marley, if he thinks he's going to play that crap when I'm around, he better rethink that one. And that is final on that. I do not want to hear any of that raggy crap around me. Sarah sighed. It's reggae, Kev, reggae. And let's just see how it all plays out. She thought to herself it was good he was making jokes. She knew everything would be okay. She took his hand. Come on, babe. We better get moving if we're going to clear Brooklyn before first light. Kevin led his wife toward the door. Before she walked out, she looked back over her shoulder. She made eye contact with Grace, who was sitting up on the top step, listening to their conversation. Sarah smiled and gave her a thumbs up. Grace smiled widely, bouncing slightly as she sat there. Sarah blew her daughter a kiss as she walked out, closing the door behind her. More than 100 miles away in the Pennsylvania mountains, Will and Lindsay and Will Jr. walked to the edge of the woods. Will held his hand up in a silent signal to stop quietly. He crouched behind a large pine tree. He looked back and signaled for his son to come forward. Will Jr. approached, stopping beside him, using a large rock for concealment. Will whispered as he pointed down to the interstate below. Tell me what you see, Junior, Will prompted. Well, a highway? More of a question than an answer. He obviously knew it was a highway, but Will clearly wanted more than that. What else? He asked. Will Jr. studied it for a moment. Well, it's an interstate highway. I-84, according to that large sign down there, Dad. So, let's see. We know even number interstates run east-west, and my compass is northeast toward the sign. He rotated around and looked at his compass again. That way says almost due west. So back toward the sign is 84 east, and this way is 84 west, he said confidently. What else? Asked Will. Will Jr. pulled out his notebook from his pack, which now lay on the ground at his feet. He opened it and flipped through a few pages of maps. Here, let's see, he said, following a line on the map with his finger. We head west to here, then we follow this route south to the rally point, right here, he said, pointing out the spot on the map. When he looked at his dad, Will said, Okay, good. What's our next move? Will Jr. pondered it as he looked around. Head west, down there on the highway? Boy, I sure will be glad to get my feet off that rocky trail finally. Smooth pavement will be much better hiking conditions. Will just stared at his son, saying nothing. Will Jr. knew the look. He'd seen it countless times. Will was a patient man, and rather than point out his error, he would wait to give his son time to figure it out himself. After all, they had covered this issue many times, and Will knew that his son knew it. Will Jr. looked down at the road, and then back at his dad. Again he studied the road, looking all around. Then he looked back up at Will and said, We stay off the road in case of traffic. We walk just in the tree line, following the road in a parallel path, 50 feet apart. Will smiled. That's right, son. Very good. He put his hand on his son's shoulder. What else? Junior looked up at his dad, puzzled. A silent moment went by, and then Lindsay spoke up. Walk 50 feet apart, take careful, deliberate steps. Keep our eyes open and our mouths closed, and our heads on a constant swivel. Keep your head in the game, and it isn't a game. And keep our radios tuned to MRS-1. And if we get separated for any reason, switch to MRS-3 and attempt to make contact. Will smiled and said, Okay, let's head out. On point, Linz, you're in the middle. Junior, take the rear. Just as they stood to walk down toward the road, they heard the loud roar of diesel motors. Get back into the trees, Will ordered.